Alright, let's go. Turn one, particularly turn one and the last sector, are really high speed corners. In this track, you'll find you sort of have to rewire your brain. It's certainly been a problem for me. I'm struggling a little bit, in that you sort of have to rewire your brain into not really thinking too much about slow in, fast out, and instead thinking more about fast in, fast out, I guess. So you really, instead of focusing a lot on how early you can get back on the throttle, focus more on how much speed you can carry through the apex. So even though you'll be getting back on the throttle later than you're used to, by the time you get on the throttle, you'll already be going quicker, and you'll still gain time going down the long straight. And you'll find in this car, this will be a common theme in most high-speed corners, where you really don't want to focus too much on slow in, fast out, and getting on the throttle early, and you want to think more about how much speed you can carry through the corner itself. And turn one, particularly, you can lose a lot of time by slowing down too much and being on the throttle early, as opposed to carrying that extra bit of speed through the apex and maybe being on the throttle early, but going way faster. And to do this, I find it usually helps if you're struggling with matching the fast guys on their minimum corner speed. I find something really helpful is to simply brake a little bit earlier and turn in a little bit earlier. It's very common for a driver to automatically make themselves try to turn in a little, slow down too much through the corner simply because they're turning in a little bit too late. And by turning in a little bit too late, you're essentially making the corner slightly tighter for yourself. If you're having troubles with that, just brake a tiny bit earlier and turn in a tiny bit earlier as well. For turn one braking, I'm using the dark bit of the track as a reference. It's probably a better idea to use the 200 marker on the left side as a reference, simply because if you have a car directly in front of you, you might not see the change of color in the pavement, whereas you will definitely see the marker. When I'm alone, I'll usually start braking at around this point, just a few meters before the pavement actually changes color. So I'd say about 5 meters. I'll be dropping down 2 gears, down from fifth into third. So you really want to focus on having the car pretty stable and quick through the whole corner. You don't want to have to deal with too much sliding, simply because that sliding will scrub a bit of speed off. So you don't want to trail brake at all, pretty much, for this corner. You just want to carry as much speed as you can through it, and really only use about this much of the curb. If you go slightly over half of it, you start to bottom out and you'll lose a bit of speed because of that. If you carried enough speed through it, you should be able to get back onto the throttle by around the apex curve, or maybe just a fraction later than that. If you got on throttle considerably earlier than that, that's simply because you lost too much speed going in. On exit, you want to sort of aim to not use more than about this much of the track. I tend to try to not go wider than about a meter off of the curbing on the right side, about this wide. Because if you go any wider, sure, you can carry a little bit more speed, but the extra distance you have to cover will sort of negate that a little bit. Then going up the hill, it's pretty straightforward. What is somewhat important for here, more important than you might expect, is your upshift into fifth by around this point. So if you have your speedometer in miles per hour, which is what I have it on. I don't know why. I'm not American, but that's what I have it on. I think 108, 109 miles per hour is probably the best moment to shift up into fifth gear. If you shift a little, just a fraction earlier than that, at 107 miles per hour, you'll definitely see a bit of time loss going down the long straight, especially because it's slightly uphill. Compounds that issue. If you have your speedometer in kilometers per hour, though, I think 175 kilometers per hour is what that translates to. For the rest of the straight, simply try to keep it as tight as you can through here. And very, very slowly start to drift it to the left side of the track very, very slowly, just so that you cover the most efficient line with least distance. And now the bus stop. So the bus stop is definitely one of those field corners, well, field sections, I guess, where you have to go on field. But what definitely does help is I've got 3 marks I want to get my car over every single time I go through here. I'll go over them shortly. First, you have to actually brake for the section. And I tend to brake so through here it's not a huge deal to brake early or to brake late. Simply because it sort of evens, no matter what you do, it'll even out afterwards. But I tend to favor braking just a tiny bit early, just to make hitting my marks a little bit easier. I'm braking at around this point, so just a meter off of where the pavement turns dark, and I'm turning in simultaneously as I brake, and I'm braking very lightly. And I'm aiming for my first mark by this point, which is just over the inside of this first apex curb. And I'll try to get maybe 2 tire widths over the grass, which is just enough so that you make the most of the width of the track and you still don't get an off-track penalty. And it's very important to carry a lot of speed, especially into this first section. And the way you'll know you carried enough speed is that you really don't want to have to get back on the throttle between here and the next mark you want to hit, which is in the next apex curve. So through here I'd be coasting, and as I start approaching the next apex curve, I'll brake a little bit as well. I think I pretty much brake about the same as I did initially. So really, you want to carry a lot of speed through that first part, and then actually slow it down for the second part of the bus stop. And the second marker I want to hit, still, I'm only braking between the two, I'm not getting on the throttle. And the second mark I want to hit, if you see how the curbing's divided into 2, you have a low bit and a higher bit. And the higher bit ends just slightly before the low bit, and then there's a bit of grass after that. The next mark I try to hit is to just get my left wheels over that grass at the end of the second high part of the curbing. And with the speed you're carrying, the car will naturally drift a little bit wide. And by around this point, you'll be able to get completely back on the throttle. And the third mark you want to hit is this next apex curve, and you simply want to use, pretty straightforward, you just want to use as much as you can without touching the grass on the inside. And finally, the last bit of curbing, not hugely important, just use as much as you need. And then coming out into turn 5, I try to not go much wider than this, so just slightly off of black line on my right side. I try to have my right hand tires pretty close to it, not farther away than about this far. And by around this point, I'll start lifting. It's more, I don't really have a reference, it's more of a feel thing. You want to start lifting and just keep the car fairly tight the whole way around, pretty much. And again, getting back on the throttle, again, is a bit of a feel thing, but a reference that could help a lot of people is that fence on the right side. Most laps, you want to start to get back on the throttle by around this point, so maybe 10 or 15 meters before the actual fence on the right side, on the inside. So I'll be getting on the throttle, and through here, it's also important to not necessarily try to get on the throttle as early as you can. and only just make the corner and only just not run out of room on exit. You want to just delay the throttle just a tiny bit so that you can very easily make the corner without running out of room. Because if you get it on the throttle just a tiny bit too early, sure, you might make the corner and not run out of room, but you'll find simply because you're turning more and for longer, you're turning your wheel more and for longer throughout the corner, you'll actually end up going a little bit slower just because those extra degrees in your steering wheel will scrub off a little bit of speed. Whereas if you just delay the throttle a little bit, you'll actually go faster because you'll be able to keep your wheel a little bit straighter and your acceleration will be a little bit more efficient as well. All right, turn 6 again. So pretty similar to turn 1. Through here, it's all about maintaining your apex speed as high as you can, and not necessarily thinking too much about early throttle. More so here, simply because the run between turn 6 and turn 7 is so short. So much like turn 1, again, you want to brake just a tiny bit earlier than you might expect. So at around this point is where I'm braking. Again, about 7 or 8 meters before the 200 marker. I'm braking very, very early, but also I'm very light on the brakes. And you just want to minimize the sliding of the car and simply keep that speed up. Just try to get on that tiny bit of curbing on the inside, as long as you don't touch the grass, because that'll throw you off and hurt your speed a little bit. And then on exit, simply use all of the curb as much as you can. As long as you don't touch the grass on the outside, you'll be fine. And then finally, the last corner, again, I'm braking a little bit earlier than you expect. I keep the car in 4th gear, which is the gear I used for turn 6. So coming into turn 6, I only dropped 1 gear into 4th. Through here again, keep it in 4th gear. Brake at around this point. So maybe 10 meters before the track widens a slight bit and cuts into the grass on the left side. I don't know if you can see that. But yeah, at around this point is where I'd be again getting very lightly on the brakes and just aiming to maintain my apex speed as high as possible. Again, don't use the grass on the inside, just use the curbing and rush the throttle as much as you can and get as close to the outside wall as you can. But again, make sure that you're not having to just crank the wheel a lot in order to do that. So basically, just the easier a job it is for the car to make the corner, the less grub on the tires will be creating and the faster you'll ultimately go. But yeah, that would be the lap.
Johnny was kind enough to share his replay of his time trials with us again this week, so we're going to go to that. Enjoy.
Cool. And for those of you who joined late, I'll mention it one last time. Johnny does give private lessons, so if you want some of that from him, hit him up in iRacing. And at the same time, if you want to buy him a beer, which means send him a few credits, it's always appreciated on his side. He does a lot of work for these.
I'd just like to say thank you again to Johnny for taking the time to give us a walkthrough. If you would like more help from Johnny, he also does private coaching sessions. You can find his contact information down below in the description if you're interested.